Just over 30 years after the idea was initially conceived, it appears that the whole of West Africa will now be adopting one currency. On the 29th of June 2019, the leaders of the 15 countries that make up the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, agreed to adopt the ECO as the new single currency. If all goes to plan, then the existing national currencies of all of the countries in the region will be replaced by the ECO by as early as next year. One of the most significant effects of this new development is that it will mark the end of the CFA franc, the currency used by 8 of the 15 ECOWAS member states. The subject of many debates, protests, and political speeches, the CFA franc is seen by many as not just a relic of French colonialism in Africa, but as a strategic tool which is used by the French government to maintain dominance over its former colonies. To really understand why the CFA franc is such a blood-boiling topic, one must look at its history. In 1945, France, under the interim leadership of Charles de Gaulle, established the CFA as the currency for all of its African colonies. The name CFA stood for Colonie Française d'Afrique, which can be translated to English as French Colonies of Africa. But after the decolonization process of the 50s and 60s, the CFA zone reduced in size as Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Madagascar all developed their own national currencies. However, the newly independent Western and Central African French colonies retained the CFA as their currencies. Today, there are 2 CFA currencies still in use across Africa. The first is the West African CFA, which now stands for Communauté Financière d'Afrique, which in English means Financial Communities of Africa, and is the currency of Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And the second CFA is the Central African CFA, which now stands for Coopération Financière en Afrique Centrale, which means the Financial Cooperation in Central Africa, and is the currency of Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. The big scandal in all of this is that 50 years after the supposed independence of these countries, France still maintains a tight grip over the currencies of the 14 former colonies that make up the 2 CFA zones. Like something from a weird and wacky conspiracy theory, France's influence is so entrenched that even the CFA notes and coins are printed in France before being transported to the countries where they will be used. The amount of CFA francs in circulation, as well as the exchange rate, are both determined by the French finance minister. The CFA is also pegged to the euro, and in order to maintain parity with the euro, the central banks of the members of the CFA zones are required to deposit 50% of their currency reserves in the French central bank. The value of African reserve assets held in Paris were recently estimated at $20 billion. And even worse, these deposits are subject to negative interest, meaning that the African governments are actually paying for their money to be stored in France. Quite understandably, many are outraged by this situation, arguing that through this arrangement, France strangles the economies of the CFA countries by limiting the liquidity of their central banks and thereby blocking their access to investment capital. The fact that the CFA is pegged to the euro means that when the euro is strong, the CFA is also strong. Now, this is very handy for the rich and powerful members of the African elite who enjoy frequent trips to Europe and own foreign properties. But for the local businesses who rely on exporting their goods to neighboring countries with weaker currencies, a strong CFA is a major problem. In periods of economic growth, African central banks are hindered from increasing the money supply to match economic growth predictions. And so growing businesses struggle to access the funds they need to invest, as banks simply do not have enough cash to lend. According to Togolese economist Kako Nubukbo, there is a rationing of credit, and so banks are very reluctant to lend to businesses, and even when they do, they lend in small amounts and at high interest rates. But why, despite all the apparent negatives, have African leaders not opted to simply leave the CFA zone after all these years? According to some, the CFA is actually a key component of the shadow neo-colonial system, which has been popularly termed La France-Afrique. According to the proponents of this viewpoint, the French government actively works to select and keep in power only those African leaders that are committed to serving French interests in Africa. Whether or not this is actually the case is a topic for another video. The official justification which is generally given is the idea that staying in this Franco-African monetary union guarantees monetary stability across the region. You see, unlike the vast majority of other African currencies, the CFA is actually very stable due to the fact that it's pegged to the euro. France's restrictions on money printing means that the CFA zones enjoy very low levels of inflation when compared to other African countries in the region. By way of comparison, the inflation figures of Senegal and Ivory Coast for June 2019 were 2.1% and 1.2% respectively, while in Nigeria and Ghana, those figures were 11.2% and 9.1%. With the emergence of the ECO, however, it would appear that the leaders of French-speaking West Africa have finally decided that the need for independence trumps any perceived benefits of staying tied to France. For the Romantics, the adoption of the ECO will be a fairy tale ending in which the villain that is France will be defeated once and for all. However, the reality might turn out to be quite different. Some have argued that by switching from the CFA to the ECO, Francophone West Africa will simply be handing over control from France to Nigeria. You see, as of 2019, Nigeria represents 2/3 of the GDP of the entire ECOWAS region and is home to about half of its entire population. Quite understandably, some commentators are predicting that the ECO zone will be dominated by Nigeria in a manner much more severe than how the Eurozone is dominated by Germany. But maybe this is a risk worth taking. By choosing to adopt the same currency, the ECOWAS member states anticipate that they will be able to boost interregional trade between member states. The hope is that the adoption of this new currency could help to double and perhaps even triple interstate trade from the current total of 10% to a more impressive 20 or even 30% over the next decade. In any case, a full 2020 rollout of the ECO is not necessarily set in stone. As a safety mechanism, the ECOWAS member states also identified 3 criteria that must be satisfied before the ECO can be adopted. 1. An inflation rate of less than 5%. 2. A budget deficit of less than 3% of GDP. And 3. Foreign reserves that can cover over 3 months' worth of imports. The pink elephant in the room is that as of 2019, no one member state has managed to satisfy all 3 of the agreed criteria. But will the situation be different by this time next year? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But regardless of whether or not the new currency will be rolled out by 2020, do you think that the adoption of one currency for all of West Africa is a good idea? Share your thoughts in the comment section and let's get the debate going. Once again, it's KB Taiwo for New Africa Network. Please like, share and subscribe, and until next time.